The NBA Finals are about to get underway today, which means we've just about reached the end of the 2022 NBA season. This was, without question, an incredibly exciting year with so many notable things going down that people from every NBA fanbase had something to look forward to throughout, even if their team had objectively disappointing seasons. Speaking of disappointments though, hindsight is always 20/20 when looking back at how prior decisions worked out, and if they didn't work out, then it's easy to regret doing it, and that brings us to the topic of today's video. Today we'll be going through every NBA team, and we will be identifying what their biggest regret of the year has been. This will be a two-part video, with today's video going through the teams in the Eastern Conference, and then tomorrow's video going through the teams in the Western Conference, so stay tuned for that as well. Before we start though, I want to thank PrizePicks for sponsoring this video. PrizePicks is the perfect service for all of us basketball fans here because when you're involved, it makes watching the games every night so much more fun and engaging. Basically, it's an application that provides you with lines on all kinds of individual player props, such as points, rebounds, assists, three-pointers made, amongst others, and you simply have to choose whether you believe they will record over the set amount in the line or under the set amount in the line. Make your selection, wager however much you want to, and if your picks hit, you can win some big money. For some picks that I'm looking at making for today's game, I'm thinking of going with Steph Curry to make over 3.5 threes, Al Horford to score over 10.5 points, and Jason Tatum to dish out over 5 assists. If this sounds at all intriguing to you, then go use the link down in the description of the video to sign up today and use promo code REFERENCE to receive a 100% deposit match bonus up to $100. Once again, thank you to PrizePicks for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to the topic at hand. The first team up is the Atlanta Hawks, and their biggest regret of the season this year is choosing to stay put with its roster. Last season, the Hawks were one of the biggest breakouts, making it all the way to the conference finals, and going into this season, many were hoping that they could build on that success. Sure, they were ahead of the schedule after a brief rebuild, but in hindsight, their decision to run it back with the same core of players instead of trying to seek out moves that could have upgraded the team bit them in the butt because they regressed hard this year and barely snuck into the playoffs at all. Next up is the Boston Celtics, and their biggest regret of the season is choosing Jabari Parker over Garrison Matthews. The Celtics are now in the NBA Finals, so obviously they didn't make that many mistakes this year, but one that sticks out came from who they chose to keep for their final roster spots before the year began. The team offered Garrison Matthews a two-way contract instead of a guaranteed contract spot, opting instead to give Jabari Parker that spot, and Jabari ended up getting waived in January, while Matthews found a home on the Houston Rockets, establishing himself as a sharpshooter that made about 39% of his threes this year on high volume, something that the Celtics lacked overall this season. Up next is the Brooklyn Nets, and their biggest regret of the year is that they didn't move on from Kyrie Irving sooner. I know this sounds like an insanely hot take, but in hindsight, this pairing is now going down in flames, and they could have seen it coming earlier. Countless reports that have come out lately are saying that the Nets are hesitant to give Kyrie a contract extension, and he is about to enter the last year of his current deal with the team if he chooses to, as it's a player option. If his unpredictability is causing the team to be unwilling to commit to him, then this is something they surely knew early on in the season, and now they risk seeing him either walk for nothing, or if they do choose to move him, they see his value drop significantly compared to where it used to be. Next up is the Charlotte Hornets, and their biggest regret is holding on to PJ Washington too long. Prior to Miles Bridges breaking out, PJ Washington was a reliable starter for the Hornets, but he has always found his name in trade rumors. He's a very good stretch forward, but likely doesn't have a long-term future in Charlotte, so the fact that they didn't trade him when his value was highest, either before the season or at the trade deadline, is definitely a regret in hindsight, as he too only has 1 year left on his current contract. Next up is the Chicago Bulls, and their biggest regret of the season is holding on to Kobe White too long. The Bulls were very aggressive last summer to build a playoff team, and they did so successfully, but after a hot start they fizzled out at the end of the season due to injuries and fatigue, and they were left thinking they could have made one more big move to help keep the momentum going. With the additions of Lonzo Ball and Alex Caruso, Coby White's role was obviously going to be reduced, and after a solid season a year ago, they could have used him as a trade piece to acquire another win-now player. Next up is the Cleveland Cavaliers, and their biggest regret is definitely a nitpick, but it's that they fell short in the play-in tournament. For most of the season, the Cavaliers looked like one of the league's biggest breakout teams, but again, injuries hurt them at the end. If they could have made the playoffs like they were on track to do, that experience would have been huge for their young core, so now it feels like a missed opportunity. Up next is the Detroit Pistons, and their biggest regret of the season is another case of a team holding onto a player instead of trading them, and here it's Jeremy Grant. The Pistons are a rebuilding team whose focus is developing for the future. Grant came to the Pistons 2 years ago because he wanted to prove that he could be more than just a 3-and-D guy, and he successfully did that, but he doesn't fit the team's timeline, so everyone assumed that he would have been traded at the deadline. They did not end up doing that, and now, like everyone else I've mentioned so far, his value is decreasing, as he is also on an expiring contract. Next up is the Indiana Pacers, and their biggest regret is giving Malcolm Brogdon a contract extension. The Pacers ended up beginning to blow up their squad, trading away a few of their best players in order to shift towards a rebuild, and Brogdon likely would have been on the move as well to acquire assets if he hadn't been ineligible to be traded because of this extension. Next up is the Miami Heat, and their biggest regret is becoming too defensive focused. The Heat had a damn good season, so it was hard to find a glaring mistake, but the thing that proved to hold them back from making the finals this year was their struggles offensively when the game slowed down. Jimmy Butler had to do way too much, and with Tyler Hero struggling, they lacked alternative go-to options. Signing Kyle Lowry and PJ Tucker in the offseason helped in a big way defensively, but Lowry had been showing signs of slowing down offensively when he was in Toronto, and this year, his age really started to catch up with him. Speaking of PJ Tucker, the biggest regret of the Milwaukee Bucks this year was the fact that they let PJ Tucker leave in free agency. The Bucks are the defending champions, and they won last year behind a level of toughness that overpowered their opponents. Having someone like Tucker battle hard with whoever he's matched up with, fight on the boards, and embrace his role offensively was huge for them, and losing that definitely did hurt them in the grand scheme of things this year. Up next is the New York Knicks, and their biggest regret is extending Julius Randle's contract. Randle had a huge regular season last year, but based on how he performed in the postseason, it should have been pretty clear that he was overachieving at the time based on how his career had been going prior to that. This season he came back down to earth, and now the Knicks are stuck paying over $100 million to him for the foreseeable future. Next up is the Orlando Magic, and their biggest regret this year is holding on to Terrence Ross too long. Ross is yet another player who, year after year, finds his name in trade rumors only to not get moved. He's another veteran stuck on a rebuilding team, and with his performance declining and his contract reducing, his value has continued to plummet. Next up is the Philadelphia 76ers, and their biggest regret of the year is including Andre Drummond in the James Harden trade. The Sixers acquiring Harden didn't quite work out the way they hoped it would, but looking deeper than that, it never really felt like giving away Drummond was necessary in the first place. The Sixers finished the season ranked as the very worst rebounding team in the NBA this year, something that Drummond obviously gave them a massive boost with, and when Embiid was forced to miss the first 2 games of their playoff series against the Miami Heat, the team played washed DeAndre Jordan in his place, whereas having Andre Drummond overtake those minutes without question would have softened the blow. Next up is the Toronto Raptors, and their biggest mistake was overly embracing small ball. The Raptors moved on from guys like Aaron Baines and Jonas Valanciunas in recent years, and now they play players like Khem Birch and Precious Achiuwa at center, who are both a bit undersized, along with Pascal Siakam getting some minutes there as well. They did well with these small ball lineups overall, but then they ran into Joel Embiid in the playoffs, where their lack of size killed them and was ultimately their demise. And finally, the last team in the East is the Washington Wizards, and their biggest regret is making too many lateral moves. The team has made an effort to give Bradley Beal some help, but their efforts have brought them Russell Westbrook last year, then Spencer Dinwiddie early this year, followed by Kristaps Porzingis, and none of those moves have really made the Wizards that scary. Beal's name continues to be in trade rumors, and with where the trajectory of the team is headed, they definitely risk losing him. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what you think these teams' biggest regrets from the season are. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.